Everyone saw the fresh cement where the creek used to run, but no one asked why she poured it there, not until it was too late. The moment I first caught sight of that gray slab cutting through my property like a scar, something inside me broke. It wasn't just the creek she had stolen. It was a piece of my past, my sanctuary, the memories that flowed like water beneath my feet. I stood at the edge of the yard, heart pounding, boots sinking into soggy earth. The water, once clear and lively, had been choked off, replaced by cold, lifeless concrete. The sound of the creek, my creek, had disappeared. All that remained was the dull thud of cement hitting earth and her relentless hands refusing to stop. I wanted to scream, to fight, but all I could do was stand frozen, staring at the destruction. "Why are you doing this?" I finally found my voice, trembling with disbelief. She didn't turn around, didn't even slow her work. The cement spread, swallowing the water's path, erasing the gentle curves of the creek like a permanent tattoo. It was an act of defiance, a declaration that she owned more than just the land she'd bought. She owned my peace, my history, my connection to something deeper. The neighborhood had always whispered about her. The new homeowner with big plans, the one who didn't ask questions and never looked back. But I never imagined it would come to this, that she would just erase the creek that had been here for generations, without a permit, without a word. My mind raced. Was this legal? Had I missed some warning? The county regulations, the HOA rules. I had trusted the system to protect what was mine, but here it was, crumbling beneath the weight of her ambition. I remembered the summers, long and warm, when I'd sit by that creek for hours, dipping my toes in the cool water, chasing dragonflies, listening to the chorus of frogs and birds. That creek was more than water. It was a living memory. Now it was silenced, buried under concrete like a secret no one wanted told. Anger boiled inside me. Fear gnawed at the edges. What would happen next? Would this illegal act go unnoticed? Would she get away with it? The creek was the lifeline of the property. Without it, what was left? My refuge had been stolen, and the neighborhood watched, silent and unsure. They didn't know the full story, just the concrete slab and the disappearing creek. Neighbors started gathering, curiosity mixing with judgment. Some whispered about property lines, others about rules and regulations. But no one stepped in. No one asked how I felt. I felt isolated, like an invisible victim in a story no one cared to tell. I found myself wondering, was I too small to fight back? Was the creek already lost? The helplessness was crushing. Yet beneath that, a spark of something stronger took root, a fierce determination not to let this be the end. I knew I had to act, but how? What could I do against someone willing to break the law, to rewrite the land beneath my feet? The thought kept me awake at night, restless and searching for answers. But sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it's quiet, patient. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who stay silent the longest until their silence turns to resolve. I stood there looking at the concrete barrier slicing through my creek and whispered to myself, "This isn't over." The creek may be covered now, but the story wasn't finished. Not yet. She thought she could get away with it, pouring concrete over my creek, my childhood sanctuary, without a permit, without a word. But what she didn't realize was that every illegal act carries its own cost. And soon, hers would come crashing down, quite literally, in a way no one expected. It started with the rain, not the soft drizzle of spring, but a pounding storm that swept through the neighborhood like a warning. I watched nervously as dark clouds gathered overhead, heart sinking with every thunderclap. The creek, once vibrant and free, was now trapped beneath her cold cement prison. Could it hold? Would the water find another way? Then the basement flooded, not from a broken pipe or faulty sump pump. No, this was something else. Her basement, the pristine space she bragged about on neighborhood forums, began to fill with water. At first, just a trickle, then a rising tide. The water wasn't dirty or brown like you'd expect from a flood. It was crystal clear, shimmering with life. Fish. Yes, real fish swimming in her basement. It was surreal. The neighbors whispered, half in awe, half in horror. How had a creek been rerouted underneath her home? Was this some kind of freak accident, or nature's revenge? I remember standing across the street, watching the water creep through the cracks, swallowing her floors inch by inch. She paced inside, frantic, calling plumbers and contractors who shook their heads in disbelief. No one could explain it. The creek, trapped and desperate, had found a way to break free, turning her basement into an uninvited aquarium. There was a strange satisfaction in watching this unfold, but it was bittersweet. I didn't wish her harm. I just wanted the creek to be free again. And maybe, just maybe, for her to understand that land isn't just about ownership. It's about respect. The whole neighborhood was talking. Social media posts went viral, pictures of fish swimming past her living room couch, videos of water pooling beneath her stairs. The local news caught wind, painting the story as a bizarre battle of man versus nature. But beneath the spectacle was a quiet lesson, one that I carried with me every day. Sometimes when you try to control something as wild and free as water, you only end up trapped yourself. Nature doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive easily. I thought about the creek, my creek, and how it always found its way, no matter what barriers were placed. It was a reminder that no matter how hard life tries to drown us, there's always a current beneath the surface, pushing forward. The basement flooded for weeks. Repairs failed. She was trapped in her own home, a prisoner of her choices. The creek's spirit lived on, not just beneath her feet, but in every ripple of water that refused to be silenced. And through it all, I learned something too. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet and slow, like water carving its path over years. And sometimes all you can do is watch, wait, and let the truth rise. She kept acting like it wasn't happening, like the water in her basement was some isolated fluke, a plumbing nightmare she could fix with enough money or contractors. But I knew better. That water was the creek's quiet rebellion, a slow but unstoppable force reclaiming its place. And I wondered, how long before her denial cracked? Her neighbors started avoiding her. At first out of sympathy, then because the smell came with the dampness and the mold followed. People whispered about the strange fish swimming in her basement tanks, about how she'd illegally sealed off a natural waterway and paid the price. But she refused to admit any fault. Every call from inspectors, every threat of fines was met with excuses and silence. I couldn't help but feel conflicted. Part of me wanted her to understand what she'd done, how the creek was more than dirt and water, how it was a living thing, a thread tying generations to this land. But part of me resented her arrogance, the way she bulldozed over years of memories and rules, believing she could bend nature to her will. Sometimes when I walked past her house, I'd catch glimpses of the water shimmering through cracked basement windows. The fish, bright, vibrant, swam lazily beneath her floors, prisoners of her own making. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had transformed her home into a fish tank, a living testament to the cost of disrespect. But the story didn't end there. The water wasn't just flooding her basement. It began seeping into neighboring yards, trickling back toward my property, reminding us all that water finds a way. The community's uneasy silence grew louder. Was this a warning? A call to action? At night, I would lie awake thinking about the creek, how it once wound gently through my land, how it had been silenced, and how even now it fought to live. I wondered if this ordeal would teach her anything. Would she see that some things are bigger than property lines or plans for a basement renovation? Or would she continue to build walls, both concrete and emotional, until there was nothing left but water and regret? This wasn't just about land or water. It was about respect, about listening to the quiet voices of the earth beneath our feet. And sometimes the earth speaks through unexpected floods, through fish swimming where they shouldn't, and through the slow breaking of walls. As the months passed, her basement remained underwater and the creek's spirit grew stronger. I felt a strange kinship with the water with its patient persistence. It was a lesson in humility, in endurance. No matter how hard she tried to cement it away, the creek reminded us all, you can't silence nature without consequences. And so I waited for her next move, for the creek's next ripple, for justice, slow, steady, inevitable to flow through. The first time I saw her face, standing by the flooded basement window, I didn't know what to feel. Was it anger, pity, defiance? She looked defeated, like the weight of what she'd done finally sank in, even if she wouldn't say the words out loud. For weeks, she avoided the neighbors' eyes. The once confident woman who poured cement like it was her right had become a ghost in her own home, trapped by water she never expected, isolated by her own choices. I could see it all in the way she shuffled through the yard, the way she hesitated at the mailbox. But beneath the surface, the real battle was just beginning. Because no one in the neighborhood was prepared for what came next. Her attempt to fix the problem by fighting back, legally, publicly, emotionally. She hired lawyers. She filed complaints against the HOA. She claimed the creek was on her property, that I was exaggerating, that the flooding was unrelated. The drama spilled into community meetings, late-night emails, social media posts filled with accusations and denials. At first, I wanted to respond, to defend the creek, my home, my history, but something stopped me. The tension was tearing the neighborhood apart. Old friendships frayed, sides were taken. The creek, once a quiet stream, had become a symbol of a much deeper conflict. I realized then that sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought in courtrooms or with words. They're fought in moments of quiet dignity, in holding onto what matters without losing yourself to anger or bitterness. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. Why was she so determined to keep the cement? What secret was buried beneath that cold barrier, hidden from the world but poisoning everything around it? One afternoon, I caught her staring at or what was left of it with a strange expression. Not anger, not pride, maybe regret or fear. That's when I started to understand. This wasn't just about property, it was about control, about fear of losing something she barely understood. And that fear was as real as the floodwaters creeping beneath her floors. The creek had become a mirror, reflecting back not just the damage done, but the human stories tangled in its flow. Stories of pride, stubbornness, loss, and maybe, just maybe, a chance for redemption. Sometimes the greatest conflicts teach us the most about ourselves. Sometimes the strongest walls we build are the ones we need to tear down first. She had poured that concrete like she was burying more than just a creek, maybe a part of herself she couldn't face. The neighborhood saw the hardened cement and the flooded basement, but what no one saw were the quiet moments after everyone left, when she sat alone staring at the water creeping beneath her floors, swallowed by a silence heavier than any storm. It was in those lonely hours that I realized this story wasn't just about property lines or legal battles. It was about pride, fragile, stubborn, and blinding. How far would someone go to hold on to control, even when the very ground beneath them was slipping away? She fought the creeping flood like a soldier defending a lost cause, but water is patient. It doesn't rush. It waits for the cracks, the weaknesses, the moments when we let our guard down. Neighbors started to notice changes in her. The sharp words softened, replaced by quiet avoidance. She stopped coming to community events, stopped posting online. Her bravado cracked, replaced by something more human, fear. I wondered if she ever thought about the creek not as an enemy, but as a force of nature she was part of, whether she realized that by trying to erase it, she only invited it deeper into her life. One day I passed by her yard and saw the moss growing on the concrete, green and alive, life stubbornly pushing through stone. It struck me as a metaphor that even the hardest barriers can't stop nature from reclaiming what's hers. That night I thought about how sometimes we build walls to protect ourselves, but those same walls trap us in the stories we refuse to change. The creek was a reminder that life flows on, with or without our permission. And sometimes, the best thing we can do is let it flow, even if it means letting go. I wasn't sure if she would ever admit fault or find peace with what she'd done. But in the end, I hoped the flooding basement, the fish swimming under her floors, and the stubborn creek taught her, and all of us, something more than anger or blame. Sometimes, dignity isn't about winning the fight. It's about recognizing when to stop fighting and start healing. The creek still flows, beneath the concrete, beneath the house, beneath all the noise. And somewhere deep inside, I think she knows that no matter what she did, it will never truly be hers to own. The day she finally opened the basement door to let the water out was one I'll never forget. It wasn't a grand victory or a dramatic showdown. It was quiet, almost reluctant, like she was surrendering to something bigger than herself. The water spilled out slowly, pooling onto the floor, carrying with it months of tension, silence, and unseen battles. I watched from a distance, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that the basement wouldn't drown anymore. Sadness that it took so long for her to face the consequences of her actions, and that the creek had suffered in the process. Neighbors gathered, some out of curiosity, others out of genuine hope that this would be the beginning of healing. The fish, once trapped in an unnatural aquarium, were carefully relocated back to the restored. It was a small act, but one full of meaning. Watching the water return to its rightful place, I realized how often we try to control what's meant to be free. The creek taught me that some things can't be forced or contained without consequences, and sometimes the only way forward is to let go. She stood there soaked and tired, eyes fixed on the water rushing past her feet. I wondered what she was thinking. Was she regretting what she'd done? Was she hopeful, or was she simply exhausted from the fight? That day, the neighborhood felt different. The invisible lines between us blurred, replaced by a shared understanding that land, water, and community are connected in ways we often forget until we're forced to remember. I walked home feeling the creek's gentle murmur, no longer silenced, no longer trapped. It was a reminder that healing takes time, and sometimes the strongest bridges are built not with concrete, but with humility and respect. Sometimes letting go is the hardest step, but it's also the one that sets everything free. She never said it aloud, but I could see it in the way she moved, slower, quieter, almost like she was carrying a secret no one else knew. The flooding was over, the basement drained, the creek free again. But beneath that calm surface, something else had shifted, something deeper. It wasn't just about water or property lines anymore. It was about the unspoken things we carry, pride, regret, stubbornness, and how they shape the stories we live. I caught her watching the creek from her porch, eyes distant, as if she was trying to understand a world she'd once tried to conquer. The neighborhood had changed too. What started as whispers and judgments grew into cautious conversations. People who'd taken sides began to see each other again, remembering what it meant to be neighbors, not opponents. There's a strange kind of grace in watching someone you once saw as an adversary begin to change. It reminded me that behind every conflict, there's a human story, messy, complicated, full of hope and pain. One afternoon, she came to my door. No words about the cement or the flood, just a quiet nod, a look that said she was ready to start over. It wasn't an apology, it was something harder, acceptance. I realized then that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. And sometimes, peace comes not from victory, but from letting go. The creek flowed on, a silent witness to everything, the damage, the healing, the unspoken forgiveness. And I knew, no matter what, it would always remind us that some things are bigger than fences or fight. Sometimes the truest strength is found in opening your heart to change, even when it's the last thing you want to do. The last time I walked by that creek, it wasn't the same stream I had grown up with, but maybe that was the point. It had changed. So had I, so had she. The scars left by cement and floodwaters were still there, but beneath them, new life was quietly taking root. She no longer tried to hide from the neighborhood, no longer claimed ownership over what was never hers to own. There was a humility in her now, a quiet respect in the way she let the creek run free, even if it meant surrendering part of herself. I stood at the water's edge, watching the sunlight dance on the ripples, and thought about everything that had happened, the fight, the flood, the silence, and the slow healing. I thought about how sometimes the things we think we control end up controlling us instead. The neighborhood had learned something too. We learned that community isn't just about rules or boundaries. It's about listening, respecting, and sometimes forgiving. The creek had been a teacher, flowing, steady, and patient, reminding us that the earth beneath our feet holds stories we're only just beginning to understand. And as the water moved on, so did we, not without scars, but with something more hope. Hope that we could build something better, not on concrete and conflict, but on trust and understanding. That creek still sings, louder now, carrying the stories of those who fought to protect it, and those who learned to listen. It's a reminder that sometimes the strongest fences aren't made of stone or cement, but of humility and heart. And sometimes the truest homes are those built not just on land, but on respect for the life that flows through it.